Hello and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast for Thursday, February 6th, 2025. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about. It is episode 205, and I have with me, I've got the first guy that I thought of having on the show after I saw Trump press conference the other day with Benjamin Netanyahu about Gaza. The only person I could think of that literally leapt to my mind and my patronage, my community was immediately posting things from his Telegram channel over at New Resistance onto our private server. And I was reading all of his takes and I was like, yeah, agree with that. Great. So Joaquin Flores is back in the house. Joaquin and I haven't had a chance to chat for a few months, but I think this is an opportune time to do so. If you don't follow Joaquin, you absolutely have to, because he's probably one of the most cogent and nuanced geopolitical analysts on the planet, and far better than the stuff that YouTube continues to try and promulgate. So, Joaquin, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. I'm so glad to be with you today.
All right, so let's get started. So I know, unlike the histrionics that I'm hearing from, the typical set, I'll tell you this. What I've seen so far is that everything associated with British media and all of their subsidiaries in the Middle East and around, they're all screaming about Trump's plan, Trump's kind of plan for Gaza, which is, of course, one of his classic Zopa, art of the deal things that he's put out there. So why don't you take the floor? Why don't you tell us what you think is going on here? And then we'll just kind of take the discussion from there.
Yeah, thank you. I would introduce it by saying that there's a lot of room here for a lot of people to be right who disagree about what's going on. Mm-hmm. And that is not a mistake. That is part of the deal, because you have to create this sufficient ambiguity. Like, this could be Netanyahu's plot. This could be something that works against Trump. This could be Netanyahu's plot and it works for Trump. This could be a plot that doesn't work out as what Netanyahu. This could be his, in his rank order of outcomes. This could be number 3 or number 4 of his preferred outcomes. And the opportunity and the setup where you're going to have Gulf monarchs, Qatar, looks like Saudi Arabia is staging their typical faux rage about Israel, yes. And that's going to be their leverage into this deal. And mm-hmm. They want to invest, Qatar, United Arab Emirates. They want, everyone wants like this Dubai 2.0 plus beachfront plus, mm-hmm. And so in looking at the histrionics, it was like, this is ethnic cleansing. And I'm like, whoa, this is of course, you're talking about relocation of people. But there's other, important factors that determine, like, do they agree with this? Do they want this? Then it's not a forced relocation. So it has to be a forced relocation, and it has to be to replace that population. Like, you can't come back.
Right.
That also is not there, right? So these people can come back.
Right.
And the right of return is there. And what we should understand, and I want to speak specifically to libertarians who get caught up in statist thinking, because the right of return, and this is so fascinating because this is also represented in the language of the right of return at the UN, the place you would least expect it in international law, that the right of return is an individual right. And representative institutions and governments cannot sign off away individual property rights. So, and that's not like my, natural law rebuttal. Like, that's what the status quo says today. Mm-hmm. So I have concerns about that being respected. Mm-hmm. And I have concerns about that not being what comes into force. But from the language of how this is introduced, it's there. Mm-hmm. So it's not a fucking agreement. It's his opening remarks. Yep. It is very clear that Netanyahu was surprised when Trump said these things. So
yes. Now that's the third different take I've heard about Netanyahu's response to this. Surprise. I've heard grinning like the guy who just won the lottery. And I've heard he was really uncomfortable. Like, I haven't had a chance to watch any of the body language people to tell us what they think is going on here. What I noted is two things. One, whatever Netanyahu was signing in Trump's office, I didn't even like figure out what it was. And there's that video of Trump pushing his chair in. It looked to me like Trump was like standing behind him in a superior position, pushing the chair in and making him sit down and say, "Now sign this freaking thing and get this over and done with." That's what
That's how I read it. His posture and body language is like, "You're sitting here."
Yeah, you sit here, you sign that. I'm in charge. I'm standing over you. I'm in the position of superiority. Yada yada yada. Because if it wasn't that way, Trump would be at the end of the table, kind of schmutzing with him, and they'd be on equal terms. No. But everybody, of course, wanted to take this as, see, Trump is like subservient to Netanyahu, pushing in his chair for him like the fucking butler. I'm like, wow. Like, how bad is your confirmation bias that the Jews run America? Like,
yeah, I mean, the optics of the whole deal, the optics of the whole thing was Trump is in control, and even the Gaza, and that's not just symbolic inferences from his body language. Like, that was the statement that he made. Like, the U.S. is taking the Gaza Strip.
Right. The U.S. is going to take control of the situation, and then, and we're going to figure out a way to end the killing. And Trump even mentioned in his remarks, this was I thought it was the most impressive thing, is he said, look, there's been nothing but violence for 100 years. And he went back 100 years or over 100 years, which means that he understands that this went all the way back to the Balfour Declaration. Okay. So he's very subtly laying blame exactly at the feet of the people that he's actually targeting with this. So.
Yeah, he included Schumer in a weird truth, like his truth, messages, like his tweets on truth. And in that message, he said something like, he put Palestinians, Chuck Schumer, or, it was like, it was very bizarre.
Right.
And it's like, how does that fit in? It's like, well, what does Schumer represent? Very interesting. There's 3 or 4 or 5 meanings one could draw from that. But, in that same truth, he also ruled out sending in U.S. troops. So people are talking about sending in U.S. troops. He just said specifically no U.S. troops.
Right.
And so, and I was actually caught up in you would call it the outrage or the whatever it was, the histrionics, as you termed it, from the crowd that were like saying, oh, he's committed to an occupation, U.S. troops. So within that paradigm, dude, I was like, well, that's preferable to IDF. I mean, if you know anything about the U.S. military and the racial ethnic composition, U.S. military, what their proclivities are, like I had friends that served in Iraq. And, there were different types of troops. There were troops that were doing like these clean and sweeps and would like knock down doors and stuff like that. And they were like certain forces that had problematic ethics and morals. And that's why they were selected for those jobs. They were like death squads. Then you have like regular guys, just your regular conscripts, and they're part of, thousands of troops that are there, and they're interacting with locals. And you see their humanity. Like, I don't want to romanticize a U.S. occupation. But right. You can see how, U.S. troops are ethnically diverse. They're black, brown, yellow. They're fat, short, tall. They're right. Very diverse in all different ways. And many of them are the same color as Palestinians. And they're not racist in the way that IDF are. Many are racist. I mean, it's a cultural thing to have this ethnocentricity in Israel.
Right.
But then that turned out not even to be the proposal.
Right. No, I know. I know. And then he follows that up. He follows up that press conference with a very impressive tweet about Iran, saying, look, I want a real, durable plan to ensure that Iran, you're going to get everything you want. You just can't have a nuclear weapon. But how do you do that unless he's also setting up a situation where he puts Israel back in the box?
Right. And it's so funny because it's like the rare rabbit thing with Iran, because Iran has disavowed nuclear weapons and they have gone a path of overwhelming defense, conventional defense and offense,
Mm-hmm.
which they displayed, some months ago when they struck Israeli Air Force bases and took out some F-35s, and they showed that they could penetrate, the so-called Iron Dome and other defenses, 70, 80%
Right.
plus with these hypersonics and others. They have a conventional arsenal of the type of missiles that can penetrate Israeli defenses, according to Mike Pompeo, that could destroy Israel thousands of times over. So we can debate whether they can destroy Israel 500 times over or 2,000 times over or 100 times over. Once over is enough. Twice over is more than enough.
And this is just to put a finer point on this for
Yeah.
those in the audience that are skeptical of Iran's military capabilities, even if they're CEP, even if their circular error of probability, a circular error probability of the missiles themselves aren't particularly good. If you saturate the air with a whole bunch of them, with 100 times more than you need, CEP is not going to matter. Now you're just talking overwhelming numbers, and it doesn't matter.
Overwhelming numbers, it doesn't matter, and they could destroy Israel many times over. And that's not put out there as like a boogeyman or a reason that we have to bomb Iran. Quite to the contrary, like this is the reason why a military confrontation with Iran would be catastrophic unless one of the other sides go nuclear. Then the response is guaranteed to be catastrophic, though conventional.
Right.
So it's Iran has issued a fatwa to the extent of a ban at the highest level of their supreme jurisprudence of the Ayatollah. Khamenei has issued a fatwa against Iran's development of nuclear weapons. At the same time, I have the belief that they may already possess them or already have a project capable, and there's really nothing in terms of sanctions or limitations of their enrichment that could stop that. Exactly. But if Iran if this is just about nuclear, this is like giving Iran something that they already are fine with, because they're like, okay, so no nuclear, which is already their official doctrine. They've shown that conventionally, and Western analysts and experts, even in the CIA, including the worst enemies of Iran, like Pompeo, agree that Iran, with its 70 million plus population and highly developed military industrial complex, and its integration and knowledge sharing with Russia and China combined, puts them in a position of being able to handle. So it really, really changes the framing, Tom. And I hope that people, are grasping the implications of what has happened in the past day or two with Trump's announcement.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what I've been saying for a long, long time. I think even before you and I first sat down to have our first chat, I was, again, I'll invoke my friend Halsey here. We used to do streams back in 2017, 2018, and we were talking about these things. And we always said that there's a framework for a grand bargain in the Middle East between the Russians and the United States. And neither of us were really hip to where we are today at that time of how deep the British, French rot is within that system. And then of course within our own government, it's becoming more and more obvious. And as we've as you get better at this over time, as you learn and you get better at this, you realize just whose agenda you're actually trying we're serving with the current policy. And that's what I'm seeing here. And I would be much more skeptical of what Trump put on the table the other day with Netanyahu if I didn't see in every other venue, for lack of a better term, every other vertical of this problem, this geopolitical problem of Trump attacking all the other verticals of Britain and France. He's going after the gold market. He's going after the bond market. He's going after the currency, the Forex markets. It's like everything. What everybody has to realize here is that to the British, Israel and Zionism is not a religious thing at all. This is purely geopolitical. This is purely about City of London and the three things that make up the core of their business, which is Forex trading centered around maritime shipping insurance and the shipping industry itself. Okay, protecting Rolls-Royce and all of that. So when you understand that that's where they make most of their money, mostly in forex settlement of all of that trade that still flows through London, you understand that if they lose control of the maritime sea routes and their presence in the Middle East, especially the Suez Canal, and the ability to threaten and protect the Suez Canal with the American military, then they lose everything else. And if Trump is attacking all of that at every level, which he is, which is why he's going after Greenland, which is why he's going after Canada, which is why he's doing all of these things at the same time. This thing with Israel, and by saying, look, no, Israel, we're going to take care of the situation in Gaza. Yeah, Biden broke it, and I'm going to fix it. And and you can always tell a disingenuous commentator on this because they say, well, you fucking Americans broke it, and now you want to fix it, now you want to take it over and put hotels on there, extract all the money, and you're evil. I'm like, no, we had an American administration that was working for continental European colonialist powers under Obama and Biden. And now we have Trump finally up to speed as to what the real fucking problem is. And he's trying to fix it all. And he was not allowed to fix it during his first term. And now he's coming in with all the power to do so. And that's the reality. That's the way I see it. I don't know if you see something similar or whatnot, but take it from there.
Very much agree with your analysis of the City of London Forex and the decline of its monopoly and with the issues that they're facing. And the way that this works into the questions there today, Israel today is 99% dependent on imports from Europe and non-Middle East for their society, let's say production, whatever, consumption, right, etc. And so that is not a long-term stable scenario when you have, in the past number of decades, such growing and dynamic centers of capital in the Gulf monarchies. And right, these are societies, kingdoms, what have you, that are able to invest, that have been but their legitimacy and their populations also are situated on a Palestinian solution. And in the 20th century, this has come in the form of a Palestinian state. And the thing is that, like, we live in this period where we're transcending the Westphalian boundaries, and we're also moving beyond a lot of the UN concepts of countries and sovereignty. And it was really the United States that began this process in the 1990s with its rearrangement of Yugoslavia, nation building in Iraq, and a lot of other things that, when the Russians did something similar in Georgia in the mid-2000s, Contra Saakashvili, and then, 7, 8 years later in 2014 in the Donbass, like this is also like continuing this trend. Turkey going into Syria and carving out a few extra 100 square kilometers in the tip of where Turkey connects to former Syria, in the Idlib province, and Turkey's influence on, HTS and FSA and its notable influence, though not total influence, because there's other forces involved too in Jolani's Syria, HTS Syria with Qatar. And, with the new regime in Syria and the asymmetrical conflict between Hezbollah and the IDF, which resulted in very big losses to Hezbollah and a depowering of Hezbollah, and then the political changes in Lebanon and their government and the crisis there and the attempts to remove from the guaranteed Shia representation in the constitution of Lebanon, to remove the ones that are closer to Amal and Hezbollah. And that may not go as planned or whatever. I mean, there's certainly Hezbollah is a Lebanese force, and they're Lebanese nationalists. They're not just Iranian proxies, or they're not Iranian puppets, but without the support from Iran, nevertheless, right, this is a practical thing of supply routes through Syria they no longer have. So it makes you then go like, hey, if one of the deals that Trump needs to make with Iran is to reduce funding for Hezbollah, right? Well, here's the thing is that funding is not Hezbollah's problem right now. Like Iran could increase funding for Hezbollah and it would not per dollar increase their force because their issue is logistical now. It's not a money problem. In other words, Iran would reduce their budget for Hezbollah anyway, only because you can't, there's no road to get to Lebanon.
Right.
And so all those things that they would send them, they don't have to buy,
Well, that's the so what I was just to say that let's put a finer point on that, which is why Erdogan moving into Syria, I've been arguing that this actually wasn't a trap for Erdogan, that this was actually the right thing for him to do effectively, was to move in and deny the Israelis that space as well. I mean, and now the question was that part of our plan, which was to allow Erdogan to go in and neuter and to neuter Israel's ambitions to the east towards the real river, right? The Euphrates River, from the river to the sea, right? And then Trump on the other side saying, you're not going to get the Gaza Strip either. We're all going to argue that these are going to be regional assets, not Israeli and British dominated assets.
Yes, many decades ago, former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi made a novel proposal for the future to solve the Israel-Palestine question, and he proposed a federal, ethnically secular, like I put in scare quotes to understand what I mean by that, ethnically secular, federal republic. And that's what Gaddafi, I know, right? Wow, okay. That's what Gaddafi proposed. And that it would be, and because he's looking at this through the lens of, this is a case of interpenetrated peoples. You have two peoples that occupy the same territory. Because remember, there are 2 million Palestinian Israelis, Arab Israelis, Palestinian, that are Palestinians, who are Israeli citizens living in the formal recognized Israel part of things. That's 2 million of them, right? Then you have several million Gazans, then you have 1.5 million or so in the West Bank. So you have these populations are interpenetrated, and which should not be a term used to obfuscate the power dynamic between these two people. This is asymmetrical, but they are interpenetrated.
Right. That's it. No, that's also really important. And so it's got to be a region-wide solution. So
yes,
I'm gonna pull the focus out a little bit, because me, I'm a big picture kind of guy. So let's pull the picture out a little bit, and let's talk about the big framework. How do you get a region-wide stable agreement if all the major players in the region, this has been my argument for years, if all the major players in the region think they can turn to the big powers of either the United States or Russia ultimately for support in order to do their thing on the ground to gain their little advantage, if you can't get them, I think, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, you can't get them to do a buy-in on a region-wide agreement on all of this if the two of them are intimately involved in funding the proxies on both sides. Like, this is the problem. So in order to fix this, you've got to do what Trump has done with the opening statement here. Hey, we're going to do this big, huge thing that's completely outside the realm of anybody else's thinking, to get everybody now thinking, scrambling to figure out how they can get into this agreement and create buy-in for everybody, while the Russians and the Americans back away from the scene. They still have their tacit support of Iran on the Russian side and Israel from the Americans, but it's not to the same extent that it's been. Take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, if Israel becomes unlivable for its 5 or 6 million Jewish Israelis, or whatever the number is, they're going to want to move to Ukraine, and they're going to want to move to Russia. Like, a lot of them still have those passports, or they have they're dual citizens. Right. I mean, there are whole parts of Israel where the most spoken language is Russian.
Right.
It's as Lavrov has said, and as Putin has said, it's a part of the Russian world, or it's a part, not the Russian world, but it's a place where Russian people and Russian speakers live. They're very
It's part of the
connected.
Russian community, the greater Russian community.
The greater Russian community, and and they're going to want to move to Ukraine if
Mm.
things hit, if so. This is actually very interesting, like what Trump proposes, because this also, keeps some sort of disbalances in future, Russian-controlled Ukraine from going sideways, because you get disruptions and you get new power groups and new investors and new people and new people in town, and you get enmity, you get ethnic tensions. You're going to get a rise of anti-Semitism in Russia or Russian Ukraine or whatever. If you have a bunch of Israelis moving there, because the alternative to this is that Israel continues to grind this out, have enmity with their neighbors. You have administration like Trump, which is like not in favor of forever war in this region. One of the terms that Trump laid to let Netanyahu after he had won the election is that the fighting must be over by the time he's inaugurated. The day before his inauguration, or thereabouts, you had the ceasefire agreement that it was actually Qatar, which all along, as we know, has had significant sway over leadership of Hamas. And Hamas agrees to this because Qatar agrees to this. And once we understand that, and then we go, so on the, just days before, Senate approved Attorney General nominee Pam Bondi to assume the position, right? Pam Bondi's been serving for a number of years as a high-ranking confidant and consultant for the Al Thani dynasty and other Qatari elites in the political system. So it's like immediately what jumps to mind is like, Reagan's Iran affair, not the Iran-Contra affair, but the Iran hostage affair with Carter, and basically having an insight and saying, don't release the hostages, don't until I come in. And people think that Carter may have lost in part because of this, one of the issues.
Among the reasons.
Among the reasons is this looking weak on Iran and not able to secure the deal. Well, Reagan's team had a back channel, had insight with Khomeini.
Right.
So very, very weird, man. And the world's a big place. So many interesting mysteries to untangle in these relationships. But in practical terms today, you see that you have an echo of this or something similar. Sure. And so then you have this agreement to end the hostilities, and that's always going to be with hiccups and flare-ups and accusing of not keeping to it, and that goes on for a few months typically. But the history of these things is pretty consistent. I'm just thinking about this, and it's such a big question, Tom, because there's of course people are interested in what's going on with the investment, what's going on with currency and the futures, and I look about it, it's like you have different, that is what has been driving this practical realist view of Palestine and Israel, and for Palestinians and for Israelis to exist into the future, in their present geographic proximities, they're going to have to get past this conflict, and they're going to, and they have to rethink. Both sides have to rethink reality and like what we're really doing. Like, why was establishing a Palestinian, and we really have to work through this, Tom. And hear me out. Yeah, imagine a Palestinian state had been established in the 50s, 70s, 80s, something, whatever, right? Imagine a Palestinian state had been established, right? Well, that establishment of a state of that population and that size could only come into being by agreement of greater powers in the region and in the world that are going to say this is the new normal and this is the norm that we respect, because in cold, ice cold, cutthroat realism, dog eat dog, like just the bigger country will take it over, and it could be a bigger Arab country. And the normal thing that could happen with like an independent Palestine, and if Israel, isn't part of its defense, I know that sounds abstract to people, but hear me out. Why wouldn't Egypt just accrete the Gaza Strip again?
Right.
Or why wouldn't if Jordan had come under, because we're talking about an alternate timeline. See, people like to just preserve one fact of an alternate time. They don't understand that it's butterfly wings, motherfucker. It's butterfly wings. So, imagine, Jordan, the Hashemite kingdom. Well, they're not necessary to be this bulwark to contain the Palestinians who now have a state, right? Now you have, so this opened them up. This would open them up to have been caught up in pan-Arabist shit. I mean, not that it's shit, but I mean, as opposed to the Hashemite king,
Right.
I think probably pan-Arabism was a better solution, personally. But you can see that these pan-Arab states were always trying to unite. They were always trying to make a super state, and they were always trying to aggregate. You had the history of the United Arab Republic with Egypt and Syria. You had the foundational premise of Baathism in Syria and Iraq was, until the fallout, supposed to be towards a single state. So why wouldn't have Palestine been absorbed into this pan-Arab republic in that
Sure.
iteration? The idea that they were going to be this little fucking Belgium or Luxembourg or Monaco or whatever is kind of a funny thought in some ways.
Right.
All the states in the world today that have like 6 million people, 3 million people are there because of this funny balancing act of like all the bigger powers around it. Like I'm in Serbia, that speaks an example of it. We have,
Yeah.
you have to appreciate these things kind of from the ground level to understand the geopolitics of being a small country. And
Yeah.
there's no guarantee that you're going to exist in the future if let's say the global order or peace breaks down.
Right.
And and there's so much space between peace and war. There's so many little conflicts of the normal condition of man and war and states. It's questionable that an independent Palestinian state. It's like we talk about things as if things are free of investment and free of oligarchs and free of
I know.
powerful players in other countries. Like Palestine would have been possibly integrated, aggregated, absorbed, invested in by the Gulf monarchs or Iraq, Saddam, whatever. Like long ago, it would have been something else. And this idea that you would have this little tiny country next to a hostile country surrounded by big Arab states that have a pan-Arab ideology and like want to connect all these states. Like Palestinians are an Arab people. They don't have an independent language. They don't, they speak a dialect of Levantine Arabic. They have their own local, things and stories and jokes and personalities and stars and some history going way back, of course, but they're Arabs as well, more than they are Palestinian in the sense that you would say there's a Palestinian language or foods that Arabs wouldn't recognize,
Right. 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 Right.
So
Right.
it's like, I don't think people appreciate that every living generation is inheriting the facts on the ground and these decisions made by our parents. And we can't undo those facts. We can only deal with the hand in life that has been dealt to us.
Right.
And many decades ago, before most of us were born, or around that time, in the late 1940s, the United States, men that were born in the 1880s, man, made the civilizational decision that the United States was going to go all in on this, this land-based aircraft carrier called Israel, and there's all this investment into those relationships. And then you have to do like a very rigorous analysis of like cost benefit today. And where are the costs really versus the benefit? What are the real threats? And to what extent is this like suffering from a machine bloat inertia, like institutional machine bloat inertia, in terms of the relationships can keep. And I always say, like, for example, like imagine that the breast cancer society cures breast cancer. It's like, but they have this multi-billion dollar fundraising like structure. You're like, what do you do with that? Like, well, you have to have a new illness, or you have to say it hasn't been cured, or you have to prevent the cure. I mean, there's many things that actually they would need to do to stay solvent, and for everyone to keep their jobs.
Yeah, because ultimately the first the first rule of any organization, the mission statement of any organization is survive. Right.
Yes.
Is they secure your survival tomorrow in order to be able to do the thing today. So one of the things that just to summarize very, very high level, to summarize what you just said, was something you said before we hit record, which is that we're dealing with the idea of how the world should work in our heads versus the cold hard reality on the ground.
Yes,
And
sir.
that's what we're dealing with right now. And
Right.
and Trump is living in that space, and at every level. And it's funny. I'm gonna throw this at in a slightly different direction now by saying, look, note as well what I said earlier about him going after City of London and going after
Yes.
um, the old the infrastructure we've always lived under, right? The narratives we've always lived under. They all went through USAID, the National Endowment of Democracy, this, that, everything else. Like we're finding out now that our entire media structure, which we've
Yes.
which cynics like us have always known, like that
Right.
these things have always been CIA and MI6 intelligence operations. NBC, it was this, it was an intelligence operation. The New York Times has been an intelligence operation since the 1930s. Let's not but to the average person, this is all new stuff. And this is all now radical shift in their reality. And it's a very difficult thing for American boomers to deal with because they don't know how to go out into the world to get alternate sources of information and trust them because they have their imprinting, they have their methodology, they have muscle memory, they have all of that. And we're dealing with this at every level across this entire conflict. And that narrative structure and that payment structure that exists to the payment infrastructure to support that narrative structure has been in place up until last week. And now last week, it's gone. Like it's gone. It's been, all the money's been shut off. These people are going to run out of funds in about 90 days. And then what's it going to look like? And we're going to find out very quickly that it was always a very brittle operation that was always maintained via the control over the wire, over the ability to control the information space. Now the information space is polluted with real facts that the United States, through partner and part of our and parts of our government, were partnered with foreign countries to fund our own destruction and our own empire that we didn't even fucking want. And yet and then everybody looks at us as we're the bad guys. Now, rightly so, because what are you supposed to do? You look out and you see American troops doing this stupid shit, and you see all of these things, and you go, America's obviously the prime mover here. But is it really? And this has been my argument for a long, long time. Like,
there's no sentient being called America.
What's that?
America is composed of individuals, powers like water, and the form of the structures around us are going to determine the way that the water flows. And the path of least resistance is the typical human norm. Right. And that's how capital markets work. That's how investment works. That's how, rational choice decision making works. That's how game theory works. This is describing human dynamics. Why wouldn't that apply to Palestine and Israel? And of course it does. So, bingo, man.
Yeah, no. And so because we're dealing with that, now we're all of a sudden have to deal with a complete paradigm shift. And, we have been the victim of a false reality of saying, okay, so what are we going to do here? Like whose interest is it ultimately? Whose interest is it ultimately to cast the United States as the villain in all of this? It's not in the United States' interest at all. But we're the ones with the money.
It's like when you think about what Palestinians are going through, Tom, and what they've been subjected to for decades. And, there have been periods in time from 1967 forward in Gaza where the Israeli regime upon them was more liberal and people could leave. And then there were times that there was some incident or shutdown, and those can go for years. I think the longest time running was like a decade. And so Palestinians in the Gaza Strip are there for different reasons. And there are different classes of Palestinians. There are Palestinians that are involved in import and on duties and tariffs and things they can get through from Egypt, through Rafah, and going back decades. And there are Palestinians that own apartments, and there are Palestinians that rent apartments. There are Palestinians that live abroad and own apartments, and there are Palestinians that the rents would be a different value if Palestinians could leave. And I know it sounds strange to think about it, but we have to get away from this one-dimensional thinking and this collectivist kind of thinking that Palestinian people are all the same and that they're all united and that they're collectively all on the same situation with regard to the Israeli occupation. They're not. Every system creates potential for arbitrage, winners and losers, and different people can form around the realities of a new regime and a new legal and economic reality like water flows. And that has created a weird dynamic where politically the Palestinian movement, its cause, I mean, in its ideologists in Palestine needed the Palestinian people to stay there, regardless of any difficulty, genocide, unpredictability of life, the IDF deciding to cut the grass or mow the lawn or whatever. And these are awful conditions. But when this dynamic has created between Hamas and then attacking Israel, and then conveniently, now everyone can leave, and that has created a broken dynamic inside of Israel. You follow what I'm saying? Where they are there, like their whole effort and the threat of so-called terrorism in Gaza has become its own industrial complex that's living its own life independent of the real interests of Israelis or Palestinians.
Right. Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. And
this breaks the chain.
Yes, it does. Like getting the money out takes, look, this is a war. It happens to be an informational and proxy war, but wars run on money and diesel fuel and logistics. And if you don't have the ability logistical supply lines in the information space are pretty short and they're pretty cheap, but it doesn't matter. You still have to then put people on the ground, staffing offices, making relationships, doing the thing, and then putting up the USAID plaques and supplying the tents and all the shit that we've seen on Twitter over the last few days, like of all the crap that we're funding out there. And so you cut off the funding, you cut off the logistics, and it's the same point you made earlier about Iran and Hezbollah, right? Like the logistics supply lines have been cut, so it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it. This is why ultimately the European Union is throwing good money after bad over in Ukraine, while they still have the logistical supply lines because, physically, it doesn't matter. Now you're running out of people, and now you're running out of time, and ultimately, if you're not going to put your people on the ground and raise a 25 million man army to kick Putin out of Ukraine, you ain't kicking Putin out of Ukraine, and you're going to lose 20 million people in the process. Because if you put 25 million people into Ukraine, Putin's going to really unleash hell on you because he's been holding back. So what do you do? So this is it's an insane level of solipsism. It's an insane level of refusing to accept reality. And Viktor Orban the other day had a great statement. He said, I just came from the latest EU Commission meeting, and I listened to these people think that, they haven't changed their view at all as to what's going on. They firmly believe that they can outlast Trump and then continue on doing what they're doing. They are living in a fantasy world. And they're living in a fantasy world because they live in echo chambers, because they don't allow for true information to filter up to them in the same way that we had, intelligence silos in the United States doing the exact same thing. So that, the analysts on the ground, I talk to Larry Johnson about this. He's like, yeah, the good analysts are out there producing great reports every day, and their bosses don't want to hear about it because they know their bosses don't want to hear it, because they know ultimately the guy in charge doesn't want to hear it. What they want to hear is intelligence that supports the thing that they want to do, not the thing that needs to be done. And that's And I think that's that. I think for the first time in forever, we get to actually start to look at the world. We get to look at that world and go, oh, now things are interesting. Now things can
Yeah,
change.
because you have the Palestinians, right? Many of them would leave yesterday if they could, and to temporarily relocate them and to reconstruct Gaza, and and then they have this right of return as well. Uh, this is the type of solution that the Gulf monarchs can sell to their population and get behind.
Mm-hmm.
And the the type of entity that emerges there um, wouldn't be a Palestinian state in this Westphalian
Right.
sense, but you think about the countries like the United States. We have Black people, we have Hispanic people, we have a lot of people, um, and we have shared values. We have a
Mm-hmm.
constitutional system, and we have economic ties to each other.
Right.
That's what makes us who we are. And so when you think about the Russian Federation, I mean, they have Tatars and Ukrainians, and they have a lot of different peoples of Russia. The peoples of Russia, and that is their constitution. It's like the first or second line of the constitution is that of what the Russian Federation is, and it's not an ethno-Russian state. It's not like an ethnically Russianism state. It's a state of all the peoples of the Russian Federation, and this type of broad thinking, you can see like who wants to make more countries in Russia, right? And what is the purpose of subdividing and making these weaker, smaller states, right? Well, they're going to appeal to national self-determination of, Volga, Volgars, Volga
Right.
Basin
Right. Right. Right.
people, Tatars, people, Russians that are related to Uzbeks, and, make that another stand.
Right.
And 14 different ways they have maps. And these are contests that were paid for by USAID.
Yes, they
And
were.
students in Georgia, and students in Azerbaijan and Armenia and Poland and Latvia and Lithuania were all winning grants to go to U.S. subsidized universities, and to train them in anti-Russianism, and how to break
Mm-hmm.
apart how to break apart Russia experts, like Russia dissection
Right.
experts.
Right.
you know
Well, they're
so
doing.
you,
They're doing. If I go by the same token, I have news for you, Joaquin. They're doing the same thing here, because they're funding. This is the same people. They're funding secessionist movements, and saying here in the United States as well. Like they're not. This is nothing new. Like the whole purpose of divide and this is how you do divide and rule. When it's funny, you say that knowing full well that, and this will be, this is something that Americans don't want to hear, but like, got news for you, like the Russian Federation is a true federation. Like each of the individual federations govern themselves individually, and you have people that are governed under Islamic law. You have people who are governed under, the people are that live in Moscow, in the Moscow region of, I guess, I think
yeah,
that's
Moscow Oblast, yeah.
right, the Moscow Oblast. They're governed under a different set of rules at the federation level than they are in. And even it's a completely different system of rules than they are down in
In Chechnya, yeah.
Chechnya. Thank you. I can't believe I spaced on that. By the way, here in the United States, Louisiana is governed under French administrative law, even though the rest of the country is U.S. is based on English common law. But each state has an independent constitution. They all have different rules. They all have different laws. Like they may all incorporate a large degree of the federal constitution, but there are significant differences between state
Yeah,
constitutions.
family law in the American Southwest is based upon Spanish common law, or Spanish family law. The family laws family law and inheritance and marriage and divorce in the American Southwest, their laws are modeled after the Spanish law. So,
right.
like you're
It's
saying, and Louisiana, and it's very interesting. I didn't know that about Louisiana.
Yeah, Louisiana is literally it's French administrative law. It's a completely weird place to the rest of us Americans. We don't know like how do you do business in Louisiana? We don't know. It's like I don't know.
Yeah, so you have this, and so the idea that a people, the idea that a people, that the final, climax of their story and success is like, are we recognized at the UN? What, for example, that in itself is a narrative. I mean, and you have, thank you. And I mean, think about, for example, Kosovo, like why we were pushed that Kosovo has to be an independent state when it had fantastical degree of autonomy in Yugoslavia and in Serbia afterwards. It was actually like an invented problem that extremists made, that they needed to be a sovereign state. It was an invented problem. I don't think the Palestinians have an invented problem, by the way. What we're talking about is that what we are talking about are a collection of individuals with inalienable rights. We're talking about a collection of individuals who happen to be Palestinian, but their rights are human rights. Their rights are individual rights. Their rights are driven by their humanity, not their nationality. Their ethnicity, their nationality, their creed is not the foundation of their rights. And it's not the foundation of how humanity looks at this question. How decent people look at this is like, individual people should not be subjected to this. We want people to have opportunities and to thrive and live and flourish and exercise all of what it means to be an ethnicity. It's not to live in a state named after your people. It's like, are you allowed to be that people is the real important. Are you allowed to live? Are you allowed to speak your language? Is it the majority thing that you see when you're out there? And look, Trump is not God. His words are not gospel. We don't know how this is going to evolve. But since people are hyper analyzing the statements that he's made, and we're doing it too. I mean, what else are we given at this moment? We're looking at the reaction to this, and they're ignoring the clear statements he made about Palestinians being the majority people, about the Palestinians being among the many people of the world's people that will live in Gaza.
Right.
So, I know what he meant when he said this impromptu. He's like, he answered the question and he said, many people. He said the world's people, because they're trying to say look, this is not about Jews and Muslims and Arabs and Israelis and this and that. Like, this is about, what do you do with this war zone, this catastrophe that happened under the Biden administration, and their inability to think differently on the subject, and their inability to gain traction with Netanyahu or the Arab leaders on a way forward. Not that they didn't have some amount of power to do that, but it's this outside the box thinking and approach to it that can actually build incentive and buy-in for the other parties that are committed to Palestinian sovereignty, identity, livelihood, and thriving, living in their historic land. So I think these are it's very strange to see how people have come to opposite conclusions about what Trump said from what he said. Like, it's one thing to say this may not happen or this is going to evolve, but from what Trump said yesterday, it's not what people are criticizing. That's what's so interesting about it.
Yeah, it really is. And I think this, in some ways, we're dealing with a situation where so many people are so gaslit, and they've been allowed now. I firmly believe this as well. They've been allowed to express their deep-seated. I hate their deep-seated racism. Like, they need to have this feeling that, oh no, seriously, I've been right all this time, and it's all about the Jews, and we're all just, it's all just kayfabe, and we're all just playing this game here, and Trump's going to sell us out because the United States is owned and operated by Israel, and blah 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 blah. I'm like, really? Like, that's the world you live in? Like, it's just so silly. Like, I'm not saying AIPAC is not a problem. It's clearly a problem at the political level. But again, most of the people that are owned and operated by AIPAC are all dying off.
If when people talk about in the sphere, if the bankers and oligarchs in New York and the city of London, who happen to be Jewish, were diehard subordinate to Netanyahu Zionists, then Israel would be in a much different situation than it is today. Like the economic situation of Israel is not one where they're the positive. They deal with the IMF, they deal with Soros. They have to. They've been getting through USAID actually, and other endless congressional sums of money sent to them, billions a year. This is happening through government and through governmental and non-governmental organizations. And there, if the Jews in the West were on the same project and program as the Jews in control of Israel, right? I'm just using these words,
Right.
right?
And these words are loaded with all sorts of.
They're loaded with all these bizarre meanings, and but
right.
I'm just using it in how people use it. Is like you can see that they would have approached the entire thing through a financial lens and not have this concern about the ethnic identity of the state or that it's a Jewish state. Like these are very by the book number, bottom line type of people, and they're pragmatic and Machiavellian, let's say. And yes. They're not committed to making sure that Israel's unemployed people or all these young professionals in Israel who can't get jobs right now. They don't care about. They're not committed to the Jewish people.
Right.
They're committed to themselves, and they happen to be Jewish, and the people in control of Israel happen to be Jewish. And maybe at someone's bar mitzvah, or because they have they know the same rabbi or something. Like okay, right. But it's the hyper focus on. I want to say that as as a person in the United States, not white, it kind of sometimes to us when we see like Anglo-Saxons and their anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, it's kind of like. To us, it looks like different groups of Europeans fighting amongst themselves. It's like the French and the English fight, the Jews and the English fight. They're all, these Europeans fighting amongst themselves.
If the United States was fully committed to making Israel dominant forever, MIDF, as opposed to MAGA, then we wouldn't have a British faction within the United States government working for Israel and a French and German faction fighting against them. We literally have sums of money going in both directions at the same time. And they don't map to party. They map to factions within the government. You have the Clinton, Schumer, Lindsey Graham, old British neoconservatives, and then, for lack of a better term, that's the Wolfowitz New Project for New America and all those, New American Century and all those guys, Bill Kristol, Mr. Inadvertent Copperphagia himself. And then you have on the other side, you have the Obamas.
Yes, this is what happens if I may say, this is what happens when republics behave as empires. Now, I would suggest that the U.S. not get rid of it being a republic. I would suggest they get rid of being an empire. But republics can't be empires. And this is not, people misunderstand what that means. Like there was this crazy guy who got busted for shooting someone. And his reason that he shot the gun was that he pointed at the person. And he said, well, gun safety dictates that you don't point a gun at a person unless you're prepared to shoot. So when I pointed the gun at him, I shot him. And the cops are like, that's not how that works, bro. Like that's not what that means. Right. So this is the same thing that we're saying. I think you're right. And when we look at the way that Trump went into this, the first thing that people fail to understand is the way that he makes deals and the way that he broaches things.
Yes.
If you were to think about how Netanyahu would want this to go down, it would be the United States fighting Israel's fight for it. And then Israel gets Gaza. He flipped that. He flipped that. And at the very end of that process, you see the Deus ex machina that Netanyahu believes that he's holding on to with the control of AIPAC and the U.S. government, et cetera, is that if they get in too deep and they expand the war then the U.S. Army is going to come bail them out. Trump completely flipped that. He made de-escalation the condition of U.S. participation in any rebuilding.
Yes, 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 1,000 times yes. And that's again, and then we look at all of this, and if Trump was not committed to that, then USAID wouldn't be defunded and under the Department of State.
That's right. These are very connected. And I appreciate you saying that. Here in Serbia, man, we have this opposition that if you just live in this in the universe of the talking points of the opposition, they make a lot of sense. And the opposition talking points about the government and its relationship with Russia, because most of the Serbian population is pro-Russian. So they're trying to sell the story that our government is actually anti-Russian. So now they can do that in this very funny little micro universe of cutting off from information. But the minute you make a geopolitical analysis, like who is threatening sanctions on Serbia? Who's been putting pressure on Serbia? And what has Serbia been resisting? And why are they the target of this color revolutionary activity? So once you put in the geopolitics, the whole story becomes clear, and all of the talking points from the so-called plenary of students evaporates. All Sorosian nonsense is what it is. Right. So likewise, man, this is the same exact thing.
Part about all of this, Joaquin, is that with USAID and National Endowment for Democracy and all of this, and the CIA the entirety of the CIA being offered a buyout, which is which is a precursor to, which is a way of saying, if you would like to not be prosecuted for your crimes, take the buyout. Otherwise, we're going to investigate you and we're going to fire you and you're going to jail. Now, that means Serbia, Georgia, Moldova, all of them, Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia. Like I said it yesterday on the space, I said, out of the blue, I said, oh, by the way, Nikol Pashinyan I think it's Pashinyan in Armenia, I give him 3 months, maybe 4 months in power. He is completely propped up by this infrastructure. All of these hotspots, every fucking one of them is being spent, is being propped up by this money. When you stop to look at it, USAID was a $46 billion a year business. Okay. So wow. I was doing this one yesterday as well.
Yeah.
Let's just go with this. $46 billion a year. This is their cash flow, right? This is their revenue. Like when you stop to think about what this is revenue. When you think about it from if this is Evil Corp Central, this is their revenue is all the money that they're stealing from the American taxpayer. It's going into their coffers to pay for their operations. Now, Evil Corp Central also has a bunch of assets, right? They've got Crown assets, they've got European Union assets, they've got this, and all that stuff, all those people. Well, guess what? Now they have to start spending assets off the balance sheet if they want to continue these operations, because they can no longer fund it out of cash flow. And that should tell everybody right now, again, wars are fought with logistics and money and food. And if you can't, and diesel fuel. And if you don't have money and logistics, then you don't have a war. And so you cut off the money flow, you cut off the cash flow. Now they have to spend assets in order to win. So Trump is attacking not only the cash flow, but the assets. He's going after Canada. He's going after Greenland. He's going after bits and bobs of the EU. He's trying to cleave Italy and Hungary and other countries out of the EU. He's doing this on purpose. Why? To force them to spend assets that they have sequestered away and they've stolen from the world. And this is how you beat them. This is how Putin is beating them in Ukraine. He's doing the exact same thing.
I believe you're right. And, also a big factor in this and really in what we're seeing through the story of the USAID is really the story of reeling in the CIA. And the biggest problem that the United States has right now in terms of international relations is that because of the CIA able to operate independently from elected government, the United States, in the view of other countries, including Russia, is non-agreement capable. Right. You can't agree with civilian government if USAID and the CIA are running these operations anyway. So I don't believe that it's a coincidence that we have now confirmation from the Russian side and the American side, the Trump side, that mid-level or high-level talks between officials in both governments have already exchanged words and ideas about a settlement. And we have, you can see from the Russian side, they would say, like, our first problem is that you're non-agreement capable. Like, we're talking to the elected government, but you have this deep state, CIA, USAID, that's going to keep funding all of this shit in our countries in the destabilization. So it's like, this is an olive branch, and this is a good faith measure that shows other countries that, yes, the United States, like the president, the Senate, like that's where the agreements are going to come from. It's not going to be we agree on paper to one thing, but the CIA is running its operations in perpetuity in some other direction.
Agreed. And I think another big tell here was the report that the United States is backing Russia's argument that before peace talks can happen, we need to have elections in Ukraine, because that's an absolute olive branch to Putin, who's made it abundantly clear that he does not consider Zelensky agreement capable because he's not really the president.
Yeah, they've already said that he's not legitimate as a leader, and that they really don't think that they can talk to him. And Zelensky, the one that has the law that he made that he won't talk to Putin, is now saying that he can and would, which I believe that he would and that he can, but that just shows that it's a dictatorship and he makes the laws and changes the laws on the fly, and that actually is the reason that he's not legitimate. Like, how can you go against a law that your own parliament just passed, that you proposed it and signed it, but how can you go against your government law that you can't talk to Putin?
Right.
Unless you're a tyrant.
Right. Well, and there it is. I think that this is ultimately what we're gonna find out. Like, ultimately here, all of the old Gordian knot of geopolitics was cleaved the other day. And it's being slashed and destroyed at multiple levels. I think that's ultimately what we should be, in many ways, celebrating. Is it going to be perfect? Is everybody going to get what they want? No. A good geopolitical solution to any of these problems means everybody has to take a small bite off the shit sandwich, and then come together. And so to wrap up, let's just put a finer point on what we talked about at the beginning of this, and then we'll cut this one off for the day. Is the framework now exists, and I would like you to speak to this about how that, just to really wrap this up for people, because I don't think we quite covered it the way I would like to, which is to say, what Trump proposed the other day, I think, is a means by which to get all the players in the region to buy into some form of an agreement. And
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So
yes.
What I mean, so just talk about that and puts a little bit more color on that to just make that point abundantly clear that, if you don't, so I'll stop and let you finish.
Yeah. So people, we talk about the Marxists and Marxism all the time. It's interesting. The sociology of Marxism is based in, or became identified by C. Wright Mills as conflict theory. And this is like counterposed to the sociology of like Durkheim, which is like a system theory. In other words, like, just because parties believe that they're in a conflict doesn't mean that they're not actually two parts of a single process. In other words, processes occur independently of our consciousness of them. So, Trump's things that he said that are disagreeable to people is meant to clarify their opposition and get them in their buy-in to clarify their terms.
Right.
You see, it's not, and so it's not meant to say that it's the opposite of his words too. Like, he didn't say a deal isn't possible. He said this is for everyone to buy in. This is like not. He specifically did not name Israel.
Yeah.
This is I want people to understand that when you have something that has been a broken process, a broken system, a humanitarian crisis, it's seeds going back over 100 years, as Trump said. This is in practical reality, the one that we live in, right? Not the one that as a teenager, marching with the communists for the Palestinian rights. And it's all Palestine, push Israel to the sea, and all that idealism, that is not how the world functions, and solutions are always based upon the givens of the reality on the ground. This creates all of this potential that didn't exist before. It's like there were all these twigs and shit and rocks between the gears. You have to
Right.
clean it all out. The machine has to run. People can believe that they're in opposition to each other and work in a coherent, symbiotic way. And the symbiotic model being proposed is one that has, people have been talking about this for years, man. And like I said, even Gaddafi pitched it, decades ago.
Right.
Israelstein, he called it. So I think, in circling back to the focus here as we close is number one. I hope people are red pilled on fake news, and that there's going to be so many articles imagining Trump officials off the record saying what's really going to happen, or what this is like the New York Times, this is like the BBC, this is like Politico. And remember, these were the ones that received USAID money, so
Yep.
yeah, let's keep this all in perspective. And, I always say put the at least 24-hour rule in effect, when it comes to reaction to, anything solid about these announcements.
Yeah, I broke my rule. I've been mostly trying to keep the 48 to 72 out. Yeah, but this one was big, and it really started to create and it was timed in such a way as to suck. I mean, I honestly think that Trump did this on purpose in order to distract from what was going on in the Senate to get the last few cabinet confirmations through. I think he's completely in control of the Overton window at this point. I think he knows exactly what he's doing, and in that respect. But I think this is something we needed to at least start taping out the framework of. Again, we may be wrong about some of the details here, and at the end of the day, we don't know what the deal is going to look like, but we know what the incentives are of the people, the real vaster powers, meaning the United States and Russia. We know what they want. We know what the Brits want. We know what the French want. And to a lesser extent, we even know what the Chinese want, and they're going to determine this. But the question is, which ones are going to be frozen out of the real negotiations? And I think the Brits and the French are going to be kept out of the negotiations, just like they're going to be kept out of the negotiations over Ukraine. And that, the Russians and the Americans are going to bring the Arabs into this and say, okay, let's fix this. And then that's that. And then if you can get Iran to buy in to effectively kill off the axis of resistance, which has been sincerely neutered, and in many ways you have to credit Israel here for doing so.
Yeah, they have. Yes, I mean, I would conclude and say that there is a new reality in the region, and one thing that we know for sure is that despite the military and economic and relationship very close between Iran and Russia, Russia has the full array of diplomacy and very close relations with Gulf monarchies and all of this. They're very much respected, their opinions, and they have a lot of weight. They have a lot of cards to play with those countries, and they affected. The Russians worked with the Saudis to remove Morsi from Egypt and put in al-Sisi. There was a lot of things that have been, compromise candidates and compromise solutions that the Russians and Gulf state monarchs have worked. Clearly, the Trump administration also has inroads, and this goes back to his first administration. Everyone knows the famous dance with the Saudis and all of these things. So I am cautiously optimistic about the things that we're seeing.
Yeah, me too. I agree completely. So let's continue to watch this, and then we'll see how it plays out. And we should be able to. Yeah. I think you and I should round up in 2 or 3 months, and we'll do it again.
Cool.
And then we'll talk about where it goes. Thank you, Joaquin, so much for jumping in.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, we put this thing together literally yesterday morning, so
yeah,
we're able to get this together. I'm going to get this out in a day or two, and we'll go from there. So you have a wonderful rest of your day, and let's hope for the best over in Serbia, because it's we've been watching it very carefully within my community. I have a couple of prominent members who are Serbs, and so I keep up on what's going on there. We always use it as a test case to see what they're trying to do next. So we'll see what's going on. All right, man. Take care.
Thanks, man. Cheers.